In the quiet afternoon light of Yellowstone, a full-grown mountain lion suddenly charged down the cliff, sending the entire tour group into panic. But in the chaos, one elderly woman didn't run. She stood perfectly still, her eyes trembling as if she recognized something no one else could. And then the unthinkable happened. The massive predator stopped right in front of her, staring at her like someone it had been searching for after 12 long years. The wind carried a thin edge of cold across the Yellowstone overlook, the kind that slipped into jacket seams and made older bones stiffen. Dozens of visitors clustered along the wooden railing, pointing cameras toward the wide valley of pines and broken rock below. It should have been an ordinary midday tour, quiet, scenic, safe. Yet even before anything happened, some people later said they felt the air change, as if the mountains themselves were holding their breath. Carter, the young guide assigned to the group, tapped the side of the binoculars hanging from his neck. "All right, folks, if we're lucky, we might spot elk moving through the low brush. Mountain lions rarely appear this close in daylight, but—" He stopped, mid-sentence, mid-breath. A sharp gasp tore through the crowd as something moved high above them, near the jagged rim of the rock wall. A shape, large, fluid, unmistakably alive, slipped out from behind a pine trunk. For a heartbeat, the overlook went completely still. Then the shape stepped into full view, muscles rippling beneath tawny fur. A mountain lion, and not a small one. The animal paused at the cliff's edge, tail flicking once, golden eyes scanning the humans scattered below. A mother clutched her child. Someone whispered a prayer. Someone else fumbled for their phone, hands shaking too badly to keep the frame steady. "Everybody back!" Carter shouted, his voice cracking. "Move away from the railing. Don't run. Don't scream. Just move back slowly." But the warning came too late. The lion crouched, its hind legs tensed, bending low, and in a single explosive moment it launched itself down the slope, bounding through brush, sending rocks clattering down the cliff face like falling marbles. The crowd panicked. People stumbled over backpacks, tripping over each other in pure animal fear. A man dropped his $2,000 camera and didn't even notice it hit the ground. A woman sobbed into her scarf. Carter reached for the bear spray clipped to his belt, hands trembling. But among all the chaos, one person did not move. Margaret Hale, 74 years old, stood near the back row of tourists, one hand resting lightly on the railing. Her gray hair peeked out beneath a knitted hat, and her breath came slow, steady, almost calm. While others scattered, she remained rooted in place, staring at the lion with a look no one around her could understand. Not horror, not shock, recognition. The lion closed half the distance in seconds, leaping between stones with terrifying grace. The crowd shrieked. Carter swore under his breath. Even the wind seemed to pull back from the moment. "Ma'am, ma'am, step away!" Carter yelled, sprinting toward her. "It's coming straight at you." Margaret didn't step away. Her fingers tightened around the railing, knuckles whitening beneath weathered skin. For a brief second, Carter thought she hadn't heard him. But then she lifted her chin, her eyes softening as the lion barreled closer. Something flickered across her face. Something tender. A memory? A wound. A truth only she seemed to recognize. The lion reached the last stretch of rocky slope and slowed. Just slightly. Just enough for Carter to notice. Enough for the world to realize this charge wasn't a wild attack, it was something else entirely. The animal's head dipped lower, but its ears stayed forward, not pinned back in aggression. Its tail didn't lash. Its pupils didn't narrow. It moved not like a predator hunting, but like a creature searching. Desperate. Certain. Carter raised the bear spray, thumb hovering over the safety tab. "Ma'am, please, move back. This isn't a joke. If it jumps, if it hits you, there isn't an attorney or insurance policy on earth that can help." "Stop," Margaret said softly. Her voice was calm enough to halt him mid-motion. The lion was only 20 feet away now. The other tourists huddled behind a boulder, whispering frantic prayers, recording shaky videos that would later make their way through social media, gathering millions of views. A few muttered that this was why the park needed stronger safety regulations and better wildlife management, talking as if they were giving late-night advice to a financial advisor or a risk analysis expert. Anything to avoid admitting they were terrified. Carter swallowed hard. "Ma'am, please." But Margaret lifted her hand the way a mother might lift it toward a frightened child. "It's him," she whispered. Carter blinked. "What?" Her eyes glistened, not with fear, but with something heartbreakingly gentle. "I know that lion." The animal reached the flat ground at the edge of the overlook and slowed to a walk, massive shoulders rolling under its coat, breath huffing through flared nostrils. Dust clung to its paws. Sunlight glinted off old scars across its flank. It stopped only a few feet from her. The tourists went dead silent. No one breathed. The mountain lion tilted its head, ever so slightly, exactly the way a young cub once had, long ago on another mountain, in another life. Its chest rose and fell with a trembling sound, not quite a growl, not quite a purr. Something soft, something longing. Margaret's lips parted. Her voice shook. "My boy, you came back." And in that instant, before anyone could understand what they were seeing, the great lion bowed its head toward her. The entire overlook froze in shock. Carter's bear spray slipped from his fingers and hit the ground without a sound. The child who'd been recording let the video continue, hands trembling so hard the screen shook, but he couldn't look away. Because whatever this was, it wasn't wild, it wasn't random. It was a reunion no one could explain. Margaret reached out, breath unsteady, tears pooling in the corners of her eyes. The lion stepped closer, slow, deliberate, certain. Its gaze locked onto hers with an emotion no one on that mountain had ever seen in a wild predator. And the world, just for a moment, felt utterly still. For a long moment after the lion bowed its head toward her, the world around Margaret felt strangely distant, like sound traveling through snow, muted and softened. She didn't touch him, not yet. She only stood there, trembling, while the old weight of memory rose slowly from the place she had buried it years ago. Then the wind changed, brushing her cheek with the same cold edge the mountains had carried the night everything began. She closed her eyes, and just like that, she was no longer on the Yellowstone overlook. She was back in Colorado on a winter morning that had carved itself into her bones. It had been 12 years before, but she remembered every color of that day. The pale sky, the sharp blue shadows across the ridge, the way the sunlight bounced off fresh snow in white sparks. The kind of morning that demanded caution. Storms in those mountains came fast, and they came hard. But she had always trusted the land more than she trusted the forecasts on the radio or the finance ads she heard while the station cut to commercial. The mountains spoke their own warnings if you learned how to listen. She'd been checking trail cameras for the wildlife department, a job she kept doing long after her retirement papers were signed. Work gave her a reason to wake up, to put on her boots, to feel like she still mattered. After her husband's heart attack, after her son died under an avalanche that no insurance policy or safety course could have prevented, silence had smothered the house. The only voice she still recognized was the one inside her own head, telling her to keep moving. That morning, the snow beneath her boots had the brittle sound she always associated with deep cold. She followed a narrow trail along a cliffside, pack heavy with batteries and tracking tags. The wind scraped the rock walls and bit into her scarf. She was thinking about her son, about how he used to run up these same slopes, fearless and laughing, when she heard it. A sound so faint she wasn't even sure it was real. A thin, trembling cry. Margaret stopped, listened. It came again, echoing off the ridge. A cub, or something dying. She turned off the trail and pushed through a line of young pines, snow clinging to the legs of her pants. The crying grew clearer, sharper, almost desperate. She followed it down a narrow split in the rock, boots sliding on ice she couldn't see beneath the powder. Then she saw the blood. Just a few drops at first, bright against the snow. Then more, leading toward a jagged crease where two boulders formed a cold, dark pocket. She ducked her head, heart thudding, and crawled inside. The sight stopped her breath. A mountain lion lay crumpled in the far corner, an adult female, ribs rising and falling in shallow, ragged motions. A bullet wound tore through her side, the fur burned where someone had fired too close. Margaret had seen poaching injuries before, but something about this one felt different, crueler. The lioness's eyes struggled to focus, then drifted past Margaret toward a shape she hadn't seen at first. A cub, barely old enough to stand. It lay against the lioness's belly, mewling softly, nudging its mother's chest as if begging her to wake fully, to stand, to take it away from this terrible place. Its fur was dusted with ice crystals, tiny sides fluttering with cold. Margaret felt her lungs tighten. "Oh, sweetheart," she whispered. "Who did this to you?" The lioness tried to lift her head, but collapsed under the effort. Her breath rattled. One paw twitched toward the cub, then slid weakly over the snow. Margaret's hand shook as she pulled a pair of gloves from her bag. She spoke softly, the way she would speak to frightened dogs back when she volunteered at the shelter. "Easy now. I'm not here to hurt you." The lioness blinked. Slow, painful, but aware. The cub let out another cry, stumbling sideways. Instinctively, Margaret reached out to steady it. Her fingers brushed its fur. It was cold, too cold, and the little body leaned into her hand with surprising trust. And then something happened that she would never forget. With a shuddering breath, the lioness pushed herself forward, dragging her injured body across the snow. Her claws scraped the stone. She gathered what little strength remained and nudged the cub toward Margaret, weakly but unmistakably. A mother's last command. The meaning struck Margaret like an avalanche. The lioness wasn't trying to defend her cub, she was placing it into her hands. Margaret shook her head. "No, don't do this. You can make it. Just hold on." But the lioness's eyes held hers with a clarity that cut straight through the cold. A plea. A surrender. And something else. Something Margaret recognized with a pain that spread hot behind her ribs. It was the same look she had given the rescue team years ago when they dug her son's body from the snow. She knelt beside the dying mother, her breath coming hard. "I'll take him," she whispered, voice cracking. "I swear to you, I'll take him." The lioness exhaled once, long and trembling, her body relaxed, her head lowered to the snow. She didn't move again. Margaret bowed her head, pressing a gloved hand against the lioness's flank. The grief hit her in a wave, raw, familiar, merciless. She closed her eyes until her breath steadied. A blast of wind shoved snow into the cave, and the temperature dropped sharply. The cub shivered violently. She scooped him up, tucking his tiny body against her chest. "We're getting you warm," she murmured. "Right now." Just then, footsteps crunched outside. "Margaret!" a voice shouted. "You out here?" Ranger Cole appeared at the cave entrance, shoulders dusted with snow. He scanned the scene, blood, the dead lioness, the cub in Margaret's arms, and swore under his breath. "Damn it, a hunter did this. And you know the Cheyenne rules. We got to take that cub straight to the wildlife center." Margaret shifted her arms protectively around the cub. "The roads are closing. The storm's already started." Cole frowned. "We'll manage. Regulations exist for a reason." "He won't survive the trip," she said quietly. The wind gusted harder, moaning through the rocks. Snowflakes whipped sideways across the entrance. Cole's jaw tightened. "We can't just keep him. That's not how this works." Margaret stood, pulling the cub closer, feeling its tiny heartbeat thudding desperately against her chest. She met Cole's eyes with a steadiness he hadn't expected. "It's how it works today." He hesitated, looked back at the storm building on the horizon, looked at the cub's unsteady breathing, then at the dead lioness behind her. After a long beat, he sighed. "Fine. One night, but the second the road's open, he goes to the center." Margaret didn't argue. She didn't have the strength for it. She only nodded and stepped out into the wind, pressing the cub tightly against her coat. Snow swirled around them, the world growing white and fierce. As she made her way back toward the trail, she felt the cub lift its head, nudging the underside of her chin with a soft, uncertain sound. A cry, a question, a beginning. She whispered into the storm, "I've got you now." But even she didn't understand then just how true that promise would become, and how deeply that tiny mountain lion would carve his way into her life until the day he returned to her on that Yellowstone ridge, full-grown, unstoppable, and unforgettable. The storm hit harder than the radio had promised. By the time Margaret reached her truck, snow was already falling in thick, wind-driven sheets that erased the road ahead in long, white curtains. She tucked the cub deep inside her parka, close to her chest, and felt its fragile body shiver against her sweater. Each breath it took seemed like a question, and each time its ribs lifted, she silently answered, "Stay. Please stay." The drive back to her cabin was slow and careful, tires slipping now and then on hidden ice. She knew every curve of that mountain road, knew where rock slides had fallen years ago and where black ice formed first, the way some people knew interest rates or credit card statements by heart. Still, her hands tightened on the steering wheel each time a gust shoved the truck sideways. The heater squeaked, blowing air that was warm but not quite enough. She turned it up anyway, angling the vents toward the bundle beneath her coat. When she finally pulled into the narrow clearing that served as a driveway, the world had gone quiet in that eerie storm way. No birds, no distant chainsaws, just the hiss of falling snow. Her small A-frame cabin hunched against the slope, roof already powdered white. She killed the engine and sat for a moment, catching her breath, listening to the cub's faint whimpers. "It's all right," she murmured. "We're home." Inside, the cabin smelled of dry wood, old coffee, and the faint medicinal tang of the ointments she rubbed into her aching knees at night. There were unpaid bills on the kitchen table, property tax notices, a letter about adjusting her Medicare plan, even a glossy brochure from some life insurance company promising peace of mind she knew better than to believe. None of that mattered now. She kicked the door shut with her heel and headed straight for the wood stove. She set the cub down on a folded blanket in front of the stove, then knelt to coax the embers back to life. Soon, an orange glow spread through the small space, heat seeping into the chill. The cub tried to stand, legs wobbling. It gave a soft, hoarse cry toward the door, toward the mountains where its mother lay still and silent in the snow. "I know," Margaret said quietly. "I know you're looking for her." She warmed a small pot of water, mixed powdered milk the wildlife center kept for emergencies, and tested a few drops on her wrist, like she had done decades ago with her son. Her hands remembered the motion more easily than her mind did. She wrapped the cub in a thinner blanket and lifted its head with gentle fingers, easing the bottle nipple to its mouth. At first it refused. Its little jaws clenched, its ears twitched restlessly. Then some deep instinct overrode its fear. Its tongue moved. A tentative suck, then another. Within seconds it was drinking greedily, paws kneading the air, eyes closed. "There you go," she whispered. "You're tougher than you look, you know that?" She watched the milk level drop, feeling that strange tightness in her chest ease just a fraction. Outside, the storm howled against the windows and piled snow against the door. But in that small circle of lamplight by the stove, time seemed to soften around them. Later, when the cub slept, she sat back in an old covered armchair, the one her husband used to fall asleep in after long shifts, the one her boy had climbed into with picture books and sticky hands. The cabin felt less empty with the small creature's breathing filling the space between tick-tocks of the clock on the wall. She should have called the center again. She should have updated Ranger Cole, reassured him she wasn't planning to break every rule in the manual. Instead, she watched the cub's chest rise and fall and thought about how quickly a life could end under snow, under stone, under circumstances no attorney or doctor or expert could fix afterward. In the early hours, just as the storm wind began to die down, the cub stirred. It blinked open its eyes, pale blue shadows of the gold they would someday become, and looked around with a confusion so naked it made her throat ache. He tried to stand, slipped, and tumbled sideways. A squeak of protest escaped him. Margaret chuckled softly. "Well now, that's not very dignified." She reached a hand toward him, palm open. He sniffed at her fingers, then pushed his tiny head into her palm with unexpected force, as if he had been trying to find that exact place all along. Something in her chest cracked and shifted, like ice breaking on a river. "Fang," she said before she could stop herself. The name came out of nowhere, and yet belonged to him immediately. He lifted his head at the sound of her voice, a drop of milk still clinging to the corner of his mouth. One of his baby teeth stuck out just a little when he closed his jaw, sharp and not quite lined up. "Fang," she repeated, smiling. "I suppose we have to call you something. Can't just yell, 'Hey, mountain lion,' across the room." By midday the storm had passed, leaving a world scrubbed clean and buried deep. The phone line crackled with spotty service when she tried Ranger Cole's number. It took 3 tries before he answered. "You all right up there?" he asked. "Road crews say they won't clear the pass until tomorrow afternoon." "We're fine," she said, glancing at the cub, who was now attempting to chew on the edge of the blanket. "He's drinking, warmer, still weak, but he's fighting." Cole was quiet for a moment. "Then keep him alive, Margaret. That's your specialty. But don't forget, this is temporary. Soon as it's safe, he's going to the center. We can't have you turning into some kind of private zoo." She almost laughed at that. Her, with her single-wide driveway and sagging front steps, running a zoo. "I know," she said. "I heard you the first time." After they hung up, the cabin settled into a rhythm it hadn't known in years. Feedings every few hours, cleaning tiny paws with a damp cloth, changing out blankets when they grew damp with spilled milk. The old stove ran almost constantly, chewing through the stack of split logs on the porch faster than she had planned, but she didn't mind. For the first time in a long time, she felt necessary. On the second night, just as she was drifting in the armchair, a sound scraped against the back corner of the cabin. Not wind, not snow. A different rhythm, soft, cautious steps, and the faint chink of claws on frozen ground. Fang's ears twitched. He lifted his head and gave a low, uncertain rumble. Margaret stood carefully, her joints protesting. She reached for the flashlight by the door, switched it on, and stepped onto the back stoop. The beam swept across the small clearing, catching swirling flakes and the dark line of forest. For a moment she saw nothing. Then 2 eyes reflected back at her from the edge of the trees, green and hungry. A coyote, she thought first. No, too big. The shape stepped forward, revealing a lean body, narrow muzzle, and thick winter coat. A wolf. They were rare this far down the slope, but hunger and weather made every rule flexible. The animal's nose lifted, testing the air. It smelled warm milk, fresh meat, vulnerability. Margaret's heartbeat thudded against her ribs. She'd dealt with wild predators before. Usually shouting, banging pots, making herself big was enough. But before she could move, something streaked past her leg in a blur of fur and determination. Fang. He was still small, still unsteady, but he planted himself between her and the wolf with a fierceness that surprised them both. His back arched, fur puffing up. A tiny broken growl bubbled out of his throat, more squeak than threat, but full of intent. The wolf froze. It stared at the absurd little shape, blocking its way to warmth and food, ears pricked, nostrils flaring. For a heartbeat, the scene felt like a cruel joke. One swipe of that paw, one lunge, and this defender would be nothing more than another mark in the snow. Margaret's hand tightened on the flashlight. "Easy," she whispered, though she wasn't sure which animal she was talking to. Something in the wolf's gaze changed. Perhaps it sensed the deeper danger of the human behind the cub. Perhaps the swirling scent of smoke and metal and old wood made this place feel less like prey ground and more like risk. Or perhaps, in some strange calculus only wild things understand, it decided there were easier meals elsewhere. With a final sniff toward the cabin, the wolf turned. It slipped back into the trees, disappearing into the hush. Fang held his ground a second longer, then his tiny body trembled and dropped. He turned his head up toward Margaret, eyes wide, as if asking whether he'd done the right thing. "Oh, sweetheart," she breathed, scooping him up. His heart raced against her palm like a trapped bird. "You foolish, brave boy." Inside, she wrapped him in the blanket and sat down with him on her lap. He burrowed into the hollow between her ribs and her arm, finally relaxing. She stroked the soft fur between his ears, feeling the shape of his skull beneath, the promise of the predator he would someday become. "You protected me," she said quietly, "and you don't even know my name." His only answer was a contented, exhausted sigh. Outside, the mountain stood silent under its new skin of snow. Inside, in a small cabin lit by a single lamp and the glow of an old stove, an old woman and a young mountain lion began the kind of bond no retirement plan, no health insurance brochure, no tidy line on a balance sheet could ever predict or explain. It was messy. It was dangerous. And it was, for both of them, the first real warmth they had felt in years. The winter that began with a storm slowly loosened its grip on the mountain. Snow slid from the pines in heavy sheets, creeks woke up under the ice, and the air lost its sharpest edge. Fang grew with the changing season. The tiny cub who once fit in 2 hands was soon too big for Margaret's lap, though he still tried to curl there whenever he could, folding his long legs awkwardly like a child refusing to admit he'd outgrown his favorite chair. By spring, his paws were large and heavy, his tail longer, his body stretched into an ungainly mix of kitten and predator. He trailed Margaret around the cabin with the clumsy devotion of a dog, bumping his head against her hip whenever she paused. When she swept the floor, he pounced on the broom. When she sat at the kitchen table sorting through bills, property tax reminders, medical statements, brochures about retirement planning and life insurance she never asked for, he leapt at the curling edges of the envelopes, batting them off the table one by one until she laughed and gave up. "Those companies will live without my attention for one afternoon," she told him. "You, on the other hand, apparently cannot." She knew she was bending rules that had been written long before she was born. Cole reminded her every time he drove up the rough road in his government truck, parking in the muddy ruts outside her cabin. He watched Fang through narrowed eyes, arms crossed over his chest. "He's getting big," Cole said one day, voice low. Fang lay in the patch of sun near the porch, tail flicking lazily, eyes half closed. "Too big for a living room." Margaret stood on the steps, one hand braced on the railing, the other resting absently on the doorframe. "He still listens to me," she said. "Mostly." "Mostly doesn't mean much with a predator," Cole replied. I've seen domestic dogs turn on their owners. This isn't a dog. This is a mountain lion. He's cute, sure, like a kitten. But one day you're going to see him differently, whether you want to or not." She didn't answer. Instead, she watched Fang lift his head and yawn, revealing teeth that were no longer the small nubs of a baby. Real teeth now, long, sharp. She felt a shift inside her, subtle but undeniable. That afternoon, for the first time, she clipped a makeshift line to the harness she'd trained him to tolerate and took him a little farther down the slope than the clearing behind the cabin. The air was cool and damp, full of the scent of thawing soil and pine. Fang moved with cautious excitement, sniffing every branch, pawing at rotting logs, occasionally springing back in alarm when a squirrel darted up a tree. "You're not as brave as you think," she teased, but pride warmed her voice. "That's probably a good thing." As weeks passed, Fang's clumsy curiosity sharpened into something leaner, more focused. He watched birds with a stillness that reminded her of the dying lioness in the cave. He learned to crouch, to stalk, to time his jumps. The first time he caught a rabbit, he appeared on the cabin doorstep at dawn, the limp body at his paws. He looked up at her with shining eyes, chest puffed, as if presenting a gift. "Oh, Fang," she murmured, torn between admiration and dread. "You're doing exactly what you're meant to do." One clear afternoon in early summer, Margaret decided to walk the old service road that wound along the ravine. Fang padded at her side, free of the line now, moving just ahead, then looping back as if counting her steps. "You stay close," she warned. "No chasing shadows, no scaring the neighbors. That means people too, you hear?" The mountain answered with the soft hiss of wind through needles, the distant rush of meltwater. Fang flicked an ear, hardly acknowledging her, nose busy sorting the thousand scents that painted the air. They were rounding a bend when it happened. A man appeared on the trail ahead, coming around a stand of fur, so suddenly that all three of them stopped. He wore a bright red hiking jacket, sunglasses, and a small camera strapped to his chest with a harness. A glossy trail map stuck out of his pocket, along with a credit card receipt from the gear shop in town. His earbuds were in, music audible even from where Margaret stood. He pulled one bud out, staring. "Ma'am," he said slowly, "you know there's a mountain lion right next to you?" Fang's body stiffened, the fur along his spine lifted. The stranger smelled of sweat and energy drinks and something sharp. Cologne, maybe, or the lingering sterility of a hotel room. He took a cautious step closer, phone already in his hand now, thumb flicking up a recording app out of reflex. "This is wild," he breathed. "I'm so posting this." Margaret lifted a hand. "Don't move fast," she said. "You'll spook him." The hiker laughed nervously. "Spook him? Lady, that thing could kill me." Something in his tone, in the upward pitch of fear and bravado, mixed together, seemed to flick a switch in Fang. The hiker shifted his weight, and the strap on his pack squeaked. Fang moved instantly, placing himself between the man and Margaret in a single smooth step. "Fang!" Margaret said, her voice sharpening. The hiker's heart hammered audible in his chest. She could see the pulse beating in his throat. "Whoa, whoa, whoa," he said, backing up, holding the phone out like a shield. The camera caught Fang's focused stare, the way muscles bunched under his coat. The lion's lips didn't peel back. He didn't snarl or lunge, but he leaned forward slightly, tail low, shoulders square. It was a stance Margaret had learned to recognize. Not aggression, not yet. Something else, protective, possessive, like the edge of a line you didn't cross. "Easy," she whispered. "He thinks you're a threat. Just give us space." The man took another step back, overcompensating. His boot slipped on loose gravel, skidding dangerously close to the ravine edge. His arm windmilled. For a split second, it looked like he might go over. Fang reacted first. With a sudden bound, he lunged, not at the man's throat, but across his path, blocking his fall. His shoulder hit the man's legs, redirecting the stumble just enough that the hiker dropped to his knees instead of into the void, hands scraping on the dirt. His phone flew from his grip, clattering against a rock. The recording continued, capturing nothing but sky and wild breathing. The man gasped, staring up at the lion that now stood above him. To him, it looked like an attack. Fang's chest heaved. He glanced back at Margaret, then down at the stranger again, as if trying to decide what came next. "Fang," she said firmly. "Back!" The lion hesitated, then, slowly, he stepped back toward her side. The tension bled from his shoulders. His tail lowered. The hiker stumbled to his feet, face pale. He grabbed his phone, eyes never leaving the animal. "You're insane," he spat, voice shaking. "Do you have any idea what could have happened? I could sue you, you know that? I'll call a lawyer. I'll call the park. I've got this on video. People need to know you're keeping that thing like a house cat." He backed away down the trail, words dissolving into angry mutters. When he was finally out of sight, the forest closed around them again, swallowing the echo of his footsteps. Margaret's hand shook as she rested it on Fang's neck. His fur was warm, his heartbeat strong under her palm. "You were trying to help," she said softly. "You just don't understand how this looks to people who don't know you." That evening, as the sun slid behind the ridge, a truck engine rumbled up her drive. Ranger Cole stepped out with his hat pulled low and his jaw set. "We've got a problem," he said before she could greet him. "Some guy from out of town posted a video. Says you set your pet mountain lion on him, tagging the department, the county, even one of those big national news channels. Claims he's talking to an attorney about his medical bills, about emotional distress. He's waving around words like negligence and liability." Margaret leaned against the porch rail, suddenly tired down to her bones. "He almost went over the ravine," she said. "Fang kept him from falling." "Maybe," Cole allowed. "But the video doesn't show that. It shows a scared hiker on his knees with a lion standing over him, and that's enough to make every office from here to the state capitol nervous." Fang watched from the doorway, eyes following Cole's every move. Cole sighed, rubbing a hand over his face. "I told you this wasn't sustainable. He's not a cub anymore. He's not a therapy animal or a service dog you can register online. He's wild, and the mountain is starting to call him back, whether you're ready or not." She looked past him, up toward the dark line of the ridge where snow still clung in the highest crevices. A hawk circled there, a tiny silhouette against the fading sky. "I hear it too," she admitted. "Every time he looks that way." Cole's voice gentled. "We need to start talking about where he goes from here, Margaret, before the decision gets taken out of your hands completely." She didn't answer right away. She only reached back, resting her fingers lightly on Fang's shoulder. He leaned against her with all his weight, as if he believed, like all children do, that as long as he stayed close, nothing could be taken away. But out beyond the cabin, in the wide, indifferent world, forces were already moving, videos buffering on phones, emails pinging in inboxes, names and case numbers typed into government databases. Like slow, invisible snowmelt gathering into a river, they were all flowing toward one inevitable point. The day when Margaret would have to choose between holding on to the only living creature who'd filled her empty house with warmth again and setting him free into a world she wasn't sure would understand him at all. The decision didn't come all at once. It arrived in pieces, like snowmelt slipping under a frozen crust, finding cracks, widening them. There was the hiker's angry video, which spread farther than anyone expected. There were emails from the wildlife department, carefully worded and full of phrases like public safety and liability exposure. There were calls from people Margaret would never meet, whose main concern seemed to be insurance premiums and whether an attorney might see an opportunity if anything went wrong. For a while, Ranger Cole tried to shield her from the worst of it. He softened summaries, left out the sharpest words. But the day he drove up with another man in the passenger seat, a biologist named Avery with tired eyes and a laptop full of data, Margaret knew the conversation she'd been dreading had finally arrived. They sat at her kitchen table between a stack of unpaid medical bills and an old coffee mug that still bore her husband's faded initials. Fang lay sprawled across the doorway, too big now to curl into small spaces, his tail thudding softly every time she said his name. "He's healthy," Avery said, tapping a chart with one finger. "Stronger than any captive-raised lion I've seen. And that's the problem. He's not truly captive. He thinks this cabin is part of his territory. If he keeps mixing people and wilderness in his mind, one day he's going to cross a line he can't uncross." Margaret watched the steam fade from her tea. "He saved that hiker," she said. "He kept him from going over the edge." Cole nodded. "I believe you, but the camera only caught what came after. A big predator over a man on his knees? That doesn't play well on the evening news, Margaret. The department's getting pressure from folks who care more about their home insurance and retirement accounts than the truth. They don't see Fang. They just see a risk." "So the mountain gets the last word," she murmured. Avery's gaze softened. "This isn't punishment. It's giving him the chance he was meant to have from the beginning. There's a reserve beyond the ridgeline, far from town. Good prey, decent cover. We've released cats there before. Some don't make it, but the ones that do live as they were designed to live. We'd monitor him as much as we can." "And me?" she asked. "You," Cole said gently, "will finally stop waking up every morning wondering if today is the day someone knocks on your door with a warrant and a clipboard." She thought about that long after they left. She thought about it while Fang dozed with his head on her boots, about it when she paid her electric bill over the phone, listening to an automated voice thanking her for using a rewards credit card she only kept for emergencies. She thought about it while she stood at the sink, washing 2 plates instead of 3, trying not to remember a boy who used to leave peanut butter smears on everything he touched. Fang stretched and rolled, batting at her shoelaces. He had no idea what they were planning. Or maybe he did. Sometimes, when the wind blew from the high pass, he would go very still, eyes fixed on a place far beyond the cabin wall, nostrils flaring as if catching a scent she couldn't detect. "Is that where you're supposed to be?" she asked him once, her voice barely above a whisper. "Did I keep you too long?" He pressed his head into her palm and purred, low and rumbling, as if the question meant nothing at all. The morning they came for him dawned too clear, too beautiful, the sort of day that felt like betrayal. The sky was a soft, unblemished blue, and the air held just enough bite to remind you winter wasn't gone, merely resting. Avery arrived with a tranquilizer kit he hoped he wouldn't have to use. Cole brought the truck, its metal transport crate bolted to the bed. Margaret opened the door before they could knock. Fang stood beside her, practically shoulder-high now, amber eyes watchful. "No sedatives," she said. "Not unless he panics. He trusts me. Let's not take that away from him, too." Avery hesitated, then nodded. "We'll try it your way." They walked together down the path behind the cabin, Fang pacing at Margaret's side. He moved with a strange mixture of confidence and uncertainty, like a young man on his way to a job interview in a city he'd never seen. The trees gave way gradually, the underbrush thinning until they reached an old logging road carved into the slope years before. The truck waited there, engine idling. The crate loomed larger up close, all bars and bolts and rivets. Fang eyed it warily, muscles tensing. Margaret felt the change in him, the way his weight shifted beneath her hand. "It's just a ride," she murmured. "Just a new road." He looked up at her, and for the first time she saw something in his eyes she had never seen before. Doubt. She stepped in front of him, cradling his broad head between her hands. His fur was thick under her fingers, warmer than the air, smelling of pine and dust and something purely his own. "You remember the cave," she whispered. "You don't, of course. You were too small, but I do. Your mother fought for you. She chose me because there was no one else. I promised her I'd get you to where you belong. This is the last part of that promise." Fang's breath brushed her cheek. He blinked slowly, leaning into her touch. Behind them, Cole cleared his throat, suddenly hoarse. "We have to go before the light shifts," he said. "We don't want to be hauling him over the pass in the dark." Margaret drew in a steadying breath. "All right." They coaxed Fang toward the crate with more patience than she'd ever seen in a government operation. No yelling, no prods, no tricks, just a slow, gentle insistence and the quiet authority in her voice. "Up you go, boy. That's it. Floor's not so bad, is it? Smells like every other truck, full of dust and old coffee." At the last moment he balked, claws scraping the metal lip. She touched his shoulder, pressed her forehead briefly against his. "Trust me one more time." He did. He stepped into the crate, turned and lay down, though his eyes never left her. They shut the door with a soft clang, not the hard slam she'd braced herself for. The sound still went through her like a blade. She walked alongside the truck as it bumped slowly up the road, one hand resting against the bars. Fang's nose pressed to the other side, whiskers splayed, breath fogging the metal. Cole stopped once at the top of a rise that offered a last clear view of her cabin below. He killed the engine and turned in his seat. "This is as far as you go," he said gently. "We'll take it from here." Margaret swallowed. Her throat felt raw, as if she'd been shouting, though she hadn't raised her voice once. "I thought I was done losing things," she said quietly. "After my husband, after my boy. I thought there couldn't be anything left that hurt this much." Avery shifted uncomfortably, looking away toward the ridgeline. Cole reached for the door handle, then stopped, fingers tightening. "You're not losing him," he said. "You're letting him be what he is. There's a difference. Feels the same from where I'm standing." She didn't mean it to sound sharp. It just came out that way. She laid her palm flat against the bars one last time. Fang pressed closer. A sound came out of him then, a low, questioning whine she had only ever heard when thunder rolled too close or when she left the room for longer than he liked. "I love you," she whispered. She had never said those words to him out loud before. They trembled in the air between them, old and new at the same time. "Wherever you go, don't forget you were loved." The truck pulled away, tires crunching over gravel. She walked beside it until the ground grew too steep, until her knees warned her that one more step would be too much. Only then did she stop. The truck grew smaller. The crate shrank to a dull glint of metal in the distance. Fang's face stayed framed between the bars as long as it could, eyes locked on her until the road curved and the trees closed in, and he vanished from sight. The mountains swallowed the sound of the engine. Silence rolled back down the slope. For the first time in years, Margaret's house looked exactly like what it was. A building too big for one person, with too many memories and not enough voices. The quiet inside that night felt different than it used to. Before Fang, it had been a numb, empty quiet. Now it was jagged, like a space that had been filled and then hollowed out again. Time did what it always does. It moved. Seasons walked past her windows. She traded the cabin for a smaller rental closer to town when the road grew too dangerous for her old truck. She learned the names of new pills, new doctors, new terms that showed up in letters about Medicare supplements and long-term care. Her joints hurt more, her steps slowed. She handled her modest savings carefully, watching interest rates and muttering about inflation the way her parents once had. But some things stayed the same. On a shelf near her recliner, in every place she lived, there was always one framed photograph. A gangly young mountain lion sprawled in front of a wood stove, head tipped upside down, eyes squinting in obvious contentment. She never told most people who he was. When a visiting nurse once asked, she just smiled and said, "An old friend." 12 years after the day the truck disappeared over the ridge, she found a new envelope in her mailbox. The return address read, Yellowstone National Park. She turned it over in her hands twice before she slid a knife under the flap. Inside, on heavy paper, was an invitation. Dear Ms. Hale, in recognition of your early work with high country predators and your assistance during previous rehabilitation efforts, we would be honored if you joined us as a guest at our upcoming symposium on mountain lion conservation and reintroduction. There is one particular lion we believe you may remember. Sincerely, Dr. Samuel Avery. For a long time she just sat at the small kitchen table, letters spread out as if it might vanish if she blinked too hard. Outside, traffic rolled down the main street of the town. Pickups, SUVs, a delivery van with an advertisement for low-interest credit card debt consolidation plastered on the side. Life, indifferent and busy, flowed on without her consent. She read the last line again. There is one particular lion we believe you may remember. Her hand trembled as it came to rest on the table. In her mind, for the first time in years, she heard a sound that wasn't traffic or television or the hum of her aging refrigerator. It was a low, rumbling purr, felt more in her bones than in her ears. A heavy head pressing into her chest. The weight of trust. Well now, she whispered to the empty room. Looks like the mountain wasn't finished with us after all. When the invitation arrived, Margaret sat with it for 3 days before she said yes. Travel at her age was no small thing. The last time she'd been on a plane, her knees had handled the cramped seats better, and she hadn't needed to carry a list of medications in her purse in case something went wrong with her health insurance. Still, every time she put the letter back down, those words pulled her back. One particular lion we believe you may remember. Yellowstone felt both foreign and familiar. The mountains were cousins to the ones she'd left behind in Colorado, different in shape, but carved from the same old bones of the earth. The air smelled of pine and dust and faint wood smoke. At the symposium, younger biologists discussed tracking collars and data models, using words like risk management and public safety, the way people on television talked about retirement planning and mortgage rates. Margaret listened politely, but her mind wandered. On the second day, Avery found her on the lodge porch, watching the light slide down a distant ridge. "We're taking a small group out this afternoon," he said. "Educational drive. Good views. If he's in the area, there's a chance you'll see him." She didn't ask who he meant. They both knew. So she climbed into the open-back tour vehicle with the others, settling into the rear bench. Carter introduced himself at the front with a nervous smile, going over safety rules she already knew by heart. A boy of about 10 sat near the middle, legs too short to touch the floor, phone clutched in both hands. His parents murmured reminders about staying seated and not leaning out for a better video, the way people talked about staying on budget or checking a credit card bill twice. The truck rolled out, rattling over dirt and gravel, then climbed toward the ridge overlook. The afternoon sun softened, sliding toward that golden hour photographers loved, the kind advertisers used when they filmed commercials for life insurance or home security systems. Warm, reassuring, as if nothing truly bad could happen under light like that. And then everything that followed unfolded exactly as it had in her memory. The first glimpse of movement high on the ridge. Carter's voice catching. The sudden electric silence before the mountain lion stepped into view, large and solid and utterly at home in his skin. The way the crowd inhaled all at once. The shift in the air when he saw the truck and began to move, not away, but toward them. The charge. Fear erupted around her, shouting, scrambling, someone crying out for God or an attorney or both. Phones whipped up, trying to focus on the streak of tawny fur flying down the rocks. Carter grabbed for the bear spray. Margaret felt her heart slam against her ribs, not with panic, but with the overwhelming certainty that she was standing in the middle of a moment her whole life had been walking toward. She rose as she had before, her fingers curling. Around the rail. When Carter yelled for her to sit down, she didn't. The lion slowed. His eyes met hers across the final stretch of ground, and everything else, screams, engine noise, the click-click-click of a dozen recording apps, fell away. It was him. She saw it in the tilt of his head, in the tiny scar near his left eye, in the way his chest rose in a deep, shuddering breath, the same way it had when he'd fallen asleep against her heart as a cub. Time folded. The little bundle on her blanket by the stove. The lanky teenager pacing her porch. The powerful young hunter she'd watched disappear into the trees. All of them were here, layered over the massive body that now stood just a few feet away. "It's him," she whispered. "My boy." He stopped. Dust drifted around his paws. For one suspended heartbeat, no one moved. Then Margaret did the thing that made every insurance agent, lawyer, and park safety officer in the world cringe when they watched the video later. She stepped down from the truck. Gasps tore through the crowd. Someone shouted that she was crazy. Someone else swore and begged Carter to spray the animal. Carter reached for her arm, but she slipped free with a small, surprisingly strong twist of her wrist. Her boots hit the ground with a soft crunch. The lion watched her, head lowered slightly, ears forward. His tail swayed once, slow, uncertain. She could feel the heat coming off him, see the rise and fall of his chest. Up close, he was enormous. One slap of his paw could break her. One bite could end everything before any accident lawyer or emergency room could do a thing. She lifted her hand, palm open. "Fang," she breathed. She had not said his name out loud in years. For a moment the sound felt strange on her tongue. Then it felt right. "Do you remember me?" Something changed in his face at that word, as clear as a door opening. The hard, bright alertness in his eyes softened at the edges. He took one careful step forward, then another. The boy in the truck, wide-eyed, held his phone so tightly his knuckles whitened. The video wobbled, but it kept recording. Fang closed the last bit of distance and did not open his jaws to bite. He did not rear or shove. He did something wilder and infinitely stranger. He leaned his great head into her chest and rubbed the side of his muzzle against her like a house cat seeking a stroke. The sound that came out of him then was not a growl. It was a deep, rolling purr that vibrated through her bones. Margaret's hands rose on their own, fingers sinking into the thick fur at his cheeks, thumbs brushing the corners of his eyes. She pressed her forehead to his, eyes closing as tears slid down her lined face. "Oh," she whispered, voice breaking. "My sweet boy, you remember. You really remember." Behind them, nobody spoke. People who had come expecting scenic views and maybe a story to share over dinner instead watched an old woman embrace a wild predator as if he were her child come home from war. Somewhere a camera shutter clicked, but softly, as if afraid to intrude. Even Carter, hand still on the bear spray, lowered his arm inch by inch. Fang breathed her in. Her scent had changed with age and time and the sterile hallways of doctors' offices, but beneath all that it was still there, the wood smoke, the faint laundry soap, the echo of the cabin where he'd learned the sound of his own name. He huffed against her shoulder, then nudged her with a gentleness that would have shocked even the most seasoned wildlife expert. She laughed through her tears, the sound wet and unsteady. "You got big," she murmured. "I knew you would. You were never meant to fit inside four walls forever." From the valley below, another call rose, a sharp, questioning yowl. His pride, his family now, the life she had chosen for him when she let that truck roll away years ago. Fang's ears flicked. His head shifted. For a moment he seemed torn, the great muscles along his shoulders tensing under her touch. She cupped his face, guiding his gaze back to hers. "Go," she said softly. "They need you more than I do now. I just needed to know I didn't imagine all of it, that I didn't make you something you were not." He held her eyes a moment longer, then did something that broke every remaining heart on that ridge. He licked her cheek once, a rough, careful swipe, the way a cub might. Then he stepped back. The spell broke gently, not like glass shattering, but like snow slipping from a branch. He turned toward the sound from the valley, muscles rolling, tail lifting. Halfway up the rise, he stopped and looked back, not at the crowd, not at the cameras that would soon feed his image to every screen wedged between auto insurance ads and low-interest credit card offers, but at her. "Thank you," the look seemed to say. "For warmth, for milk, for letting me go." Then he melted into the tall grass and was gone. Only when the last hint of his tawny coat vanished did Margaret's legs wobble. Carter hurried to her side, but she lifted a hand. "I'm all right," she said. And for the first time since she'd watched that truck disappear over a Colorado ridge, she meant it. In the days that followed, the video the boy had taken spread farther than the angry hiker's clip ever had. News anchors replayed the moment on glowing screens, their voices full of disbelief. Commentators argued about safety and policy, about wild animals and human emotion. Somewhere in between segments about mortgage rates and retirement accounts, people watched a frail old woman step off a truck and wrap her arms around a mountain lion. Margaret didn't read the comments. She didn't hire a lawyer or talk to reporters about trauma or healing. She went home, made herself a cup of tea, and sat by the window as the evening light slipped across the floor. On the shelf beside her chair, the old photograph of a young Fang lay next to a new one, a still frame Avery had printed from the video, showing her with her forehead pressed to the lion's. 2 lives, 2 moments, 1 promise kept. Outside, the wind moved through the trees with a familiar voice. Somewhere, far away and high on another ridge, a lion lifted his head and stared toward a place he could not see but still somehow knew. She closed her eyes and smiled, feeling lighter than she had in decades. "I'm all right now," she whispered. And this time the mountain seemed to agree.